Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Groover. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Groover.
And I'm Jason Mefford. And welcome. Today, we want to talk a little bit about goal setting. Part of what we're trying to do here is to help you unlock the keys to your potential. And one of the best ways to do that is to actually set goals, right? And I know, Kathy, you've done a lot of stuff around goal setting already. I mean, maybe you want to kind of go through and maybe share a couple of things that help people to be successful in setting goals and being able to actually kind of realize those goals.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many steps to that. I mean, this is such a vast topic. We could go on for hours about this, but we don't want to take up too much time today. But let's go over some of the basics. I think you have to know what you really want. First of all, that's huge. And I hear people saying that they want this certain thing. I had a client who was working with a man who was obsessed with winning the lottery. He wanted to win the lottery. And she was actually trying to convince him to not make that a goal because that's kind of out of your control. And I said, well, ask him what that would do for him. Like, what would the lottery do for him? And she said, well, I know what it would do for him. It would give him a lot of money. I said, yes. And she said, well, he could help people with that money. I said, okay, and what does he want to help people with? Come to find out that he had been incarcerated for something he did as a kid. He was still in jail. It was decades later. And he wanted to help youth who were misguided. And he wanted to put together a program or some sort of scholarship fund. But because he didn't have the money, he didn't think he could do that. So he was placing all of this idea of helping people on, I got to win the lottery. And I suggested to her, well, maybe he could write a blog. Maybe he could start corresponding with kids. Maybe he could reach out and do podcasts or, something in that realm. And she presented that to him, and he had this amazing aha moment of realizing he doesn't have to put his life on hold because he hasn't won the lottery. He still has the way to affect people. So sometimes you want to ask those 5 whys of, why do I want to do this? What really is my goal? And then set your goals from there. So got to break it down to what you actually want. Sometimes we don't even really know until we ask that question.
Well, and I really like that because I've seen that. I've tried to do that in my life as well, because if you don't start with the why, then you don't necessarily know what goal you should be doing. And I think that question that you ask, so what will having that do? That's where we've got to get back to, because again, it's there. We can come up with all kinds of goals, right? But if it's not helping us kind of achieve our end, whatever it is that we're trying to do, it's kind of a waste of time, right? And so we got to do that. So okay, so we got to ask kind of the why behind it, right? What are some of the other things that we need to do when we're trying to set goals?
Well, since I am a list maker, I love my to-do list. There are days that if I do something that wasn't on the to-do list, I'll write it on the to-do list just to cross it off. I want credit for that. I worked hard on that thing. So being that I'm a list maker, I've realized that sometimes we set, this is sort of twofold, sometimes we set this gigantic goal that you're not going to get to right away. I want to write a book. And I've had so many people say to me, oh my God, I could never write a whole book. It's like, well, but I didn't sit down and write a whole book. I wrote a couple sentences, which turned into a paragraph, which turned into a chapter. And, it's that whole thing of, how do you eat an elephant? One spoonful at a time. And
Yep.
I think people look at this giant goal and it becomes so overwhelming. You do one dish at a time, you do one box out of the garage at a time. And if you look at it as this giant overwhelming thing, you don't start because you're like, oh my God, I can never finish that. So small steps, break it down more and more and more and more and more until you have that action item you can do today. Maybe it's sitting down in front of the computer and just coming up with a title for the book. Or, when we decided to do this podcast, we didn't just start. We've had how many meetings before we decided to start doing this? And we're doing one episode at a time as we can, so I think breaking it down into smaller doable steps is huge.
Well, and I think another important thing with that too is that, we need to, in order for us to be successful, we have to be feeling that success, right? We have to be experiencing those little wins. And so another thing that actually setting those little to-dos and breaking it down is we're able to experience the small successes along the way. And as we do that, that provides us with more confidence, right? So I'll give you a little, I'll jump in here a little bit about this story, because when I was younger, I was a runner, right? When everybody else was playing football, I was the nerdy kid that was running cross country. And I love to run. And but as middle age comes along and the weight has come on and come off, decided that this is a goal that I had, that I want to get back into running, right? And here's the fact, right? I had gained like 60 pounds, right, over where I should be. So running was hard on my knees to begin with. And so even though in my mind I could still see myself as this teenager going out and running 10 miles, right, no problem, it hurt. And so, I had to start with some of these small things, and just actually go out and walk to begin with, right? And have been kind of moving up from there. I mean, we just talked about one of the things on my bucket list, because I'm thinking about goals too, is running a marathon. Well, again, being an overweight middle-aged man, I can't just go run a marathon tomorrow, right? I got to take those little steps to get to that elephant. And so for me, it's actually, going from walking to being able to run for a minute and then maybe walk for a minute, to where now I'm getting my stamina up, right? So that I can actually run for a longer period of time. And sometimes, again, it's that simple thing where I have to sit there and look and go, oh gosh, I'm tired. I don't know if I can do this, but there's a tree up there and I'm going to run until I get to that tree. Right. And so again, it's those simple steps. And, next time I run that, it's going to be a little further past that tree. And so what I'm doing is I'm able to, not only am I having these little goals along the way to help me meet my goal of running a marathon, but I'm seeing the daily satisfaction from winning, right? As part of that, because I'm making progress. And so I think it's really, really important to have those intermediate steps on our way to get to where we really want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because you set that little goal, and I love that, because I did a 5K. It was the worst 2 hours of my life, but it didn't take me that long. but I remember that goal of, I just want to get to that mailbox. And then sometimes you get to that tree or you get to that mailbox and you're like, I'm going to go a little bit further. So sometimes when you start those little steps, you get this rhythm going, this groove going, and you're like, you know what? I actually can make it over to that 5th driveway. And I'm so proud of you. My husband used to run before his knee kind of bothered him. So yeah, he's done marathons and half marathons, and I just wanted the feeling of a 5K, because I would watch him cross that finish line, and that energy to me was so contagious. And it's like, I want to know what that feels like, because I didn't run when I was a kid. I hated all of that. But I wanted to experience that. I wanted to have that feeling of that crossing the finish line and getting my t-shirt, my orange wedge. I wanted to know what that felt like. So good for you for doing that. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
It's really exciting.
So we talked about, we got to do the why, right? Why are we trying to accomplish this? Coming up with kind of some to-do lists or some little things to do. What are some other things that we should be doing when we're trying to set goals?
I'm huge into visualization. That's a whole nother conversation, but in visualizing things and doing those affirmations and doing that positive thought that leads you to that. I mean, action, yes, you can't just sit around and visualize. That's not going to work. You have to take action as well. But one of the things I found out when I was an actor was you have to be really specific. The universe seems to like specificity. So I remember the affirmation that I was doing, the visualization doing, I was saying, I want to be a paid working actor. Okay. What does that mean? Like, what does paid working actor mean? I am big now on placing specific dollar amounts on, because I kept saying, I'm a paid working actor. I'm a paid working actor. I thought that was pretty specific. And then I got my first regular paid acting gig. I was touring California with a children's theater. And I was so excited because it was going to be regular. I was going to be working with kids, which I loved. I was going to be acting like almost full time, and it paid $7 an hour.
Yeah.
And I went, oh,
That's not quite
crap.
what you had envisioned, right?
But I didn't know what I had envisioned. That was the problem, is I didn't say I want $15,000 a year, I want 20, I didn't have that specific goal. Now, if you look at something like goal setting and NLP and all this stuff, you want the goals to be achievable.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you do say I'm going to run a marathon next week, it might be achievable, it might not. You want to set realistic goals so that you have the chance of having that win, because if you make it so gigantic that there's no way you're going to get to it, then you're not going to reach it, and then you're going to feel despondent, and you're not going to set any more goals. So be specific, but do also make them doable, and then, like we said already, chip away and work at those goals. So you have a very specific goal. You set the date, you're going to do a marathon.
Yep.
You're working towards that. You're just getting to that tree. I mean, you're following all those, and I love the athletic comparison. It's the perfect illustration of what we're talking about.
Well, and I think it's interesting because as I'm sitting here listening to you, it goes back to the whole SMART goals, right? When you learn about SMART goals, that's S for specific, M for measurable, right? A for achievable, R for relevant, and T for time bound. And so if we don't have all of those things in our goals, because again, I think I told you, right? I've had a marathon on my bucket list for a while, right? That I thought, someday I'd like to run a marathon. And instead, this last week I said, screw it. Why am I farting around with this? I just need to do it. And so I looked up online, when is, the LA marathon? Because I live in LA, right? When's the next LA marathon? Put it on my calendar. And now I have a time. So now I can work backwards from what are those little steps that I need to do along the way. I think it's interesting too, because I know one of the things that I've struggled with, and I think this is what's great, is I'm human too. Right? What? I know. Because the specificity, I think, is an important part, and that visualization as well. And so maybe you can talk about a little bit here. Let me kind of ask you a question, because this is one thing that sometimes I struggle with. The goal may not be as specific as it should be, right? And so again, I can work on that, but I think sometimes that visualization can be difficult too, because as you start moving along, right, all of a sudden maybe things don't go quite the way you were expecting. And so I see myself, and I've seen this over years, right? Sometimes I do a better job than others of really believing and visualizing that I'm going to be able to do this, because my knee hurts a little bit, right? Or a couple of days ago, I started getting some shin splints, and it's like, oh crap, now I've set this date. Now I'm getting a little bit of shin splints, right? Well, I know how to deal with shin splints as well, right? So I'm going to do some other things to try to overcome that. But I think it's easy for us sometimes when we set this goal to maybe get a little discouraged and think, well, I'm never really going to be able to do that. I mean, do you have some suggestions for people on how to deal with that? Because I'm guessing I'm not the only one out there that has dealt with that.
Yeah, that's such a tough one, because I don't know the blueprint of the universe. I really wish I did. This would be a much more exciting podcast if I could tell you all that I know everything in the universe. I don't know. I don't know what all these outcomes are supposed to be. And same thing, I visualize. I was so upset that I did not have this amazing acting career that I wanted. And when I left Hollywood, I thought, well, that was a waste. I was a theater major. I was really good at it. I busted my butt, and it never worked to the point where I could make a living at it. And I just wanted to be paid to be on stage. And now, fast forward to 20 years later, and what do I do for a living?
You're paid to be on stage.
Where I'm paid to be on stage. And I, several years ago went, oh my God, this is what I wanted. It's a different outfit and a different accent, and I'm not the wacky neighbor in some Neil Simon play, but I'm still entertaining people. I'm still educating people. And this outcome is what I always wanted. It just looks slightly different. So It might not manifest the way you pictured it, but it still might happen. It just might not happen in your time frame because time is not linear and the universe doesn't understand February. I mean, it doesn't know what that is. It's on its own little thing. We can get into quantum physics in a whole other show. But so, trying
we
to
can.
oh yeah, we'll have a guest on for that one.
The nerd in me coming out, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, we could totally talk about quantum physics. I have a guy who's totally into that, and friends with astronomers and stuff like that too. So we can have that whole conversation.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is about just sticking with that. And maybe you do, if you're 50 years old and your goal is to be a professional ballerina, maybe it might be time to stop that goal. But what's to stop you from still dancing, to finding an adult ballet class, or to doing a community theater production? Or, I mean, there's still ways to fulfill that. And when you're visualizing, to me, part of it is about the feeling, because we move forward based on things that have happened in the past. We move forward and we make decisions and we respond and or react based on what has come before. So since our brain doesn't recognize the difference between what we're thinking about and imagining and what is actually happening, if you visualize yourself using all of those senses over and over again, having that feeling of achievement, having that feeling of crossing that finish line, that the ribbon and the people handing you the water and the metal blanket, and if you picture that and you feel that in your body over and over and over again, at some point your brain goes, oh, we did that already. It becomes a known. It's almost like, well, that's a past thing. We already accomplished that. Yep. So then what's going to happen? You're going to make decisions and you're going to move towards that as if you already know it.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that it's amazing how the brain works that way. Right. Is because, again, I mean, some things I've heard, like talking about our little to-dos things, right? The brain doesn't know the difference between a little success and a huge success. And so the more successes we have, even if they're little ones, the more visualization we can do, the more likely those things are to actually happen. And actually, as you were talking there, it kind of reminded me of two different things to try to share here, because, the point of, you don't have the blueprint for the universe. I wish I did too, right? I mean, but it reminds me of something that Steve Jobs said before. And I've heard this from a couple of people, but I think it's in that Stanford commencement speech that's so popular that he did. And he said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. And so, like you said, so a lot of times time is not really linear. And it feels like we're just kind of moving all around, and it's like, what the hell am I doing, right? Or like your experience, in being an actor. And that has benefit, and it has helped you get to where you are today, but you only know that now. Right? You couldn't connect those dots 20 years ago, but you can now. And so I think that's an important thing too, is that, sometimes maybe the goals don't work out the way that we wanted them to. But again, if we're doing it for the right reason, if we've got that why in our mind, things are going to work out in the end. And the other thing that I thought about was, it was a story that I heard about a little girl who was going to kindergarten, and her mother had worked with her. She was really smart little girl. She knew how to read before she went to kindergarten. She could write her name and do all these other things. So the mother was really proud. I've raised this, smart daughter, and takes her in to be assessed, right, to be placed into kindergarten. And so she comes in and goes up to the teacher, and the teacher says, first little task that they're asking her to do, and says, honey, take your favorite color crayon from this box of crayons and write your name for me. And the little girl just stood there. Okay. And the mom's, over on the side, kind of looking at her like, why isn't she doing this? She knows how to write her name. And the teacher's like, honey, just pick your favorite color crayon and write your name for me on this piece of paper. And the little girl just stood there. And so the mom's starting to get a little, worried, like, well, what's going on? Why is this? She knows how to write her name. And so finally the teacher says, don't worry, honey. When you come to kindergarten, we'll teach you how to write your name, right? And so it really kind of bothered the mom. And so on the way home, she kind of casually asked the daughter, honey, when the teacher asked you to write your name, why didn't you write your name? You know how to do that. And she said, well, Mommy, she told me to pick my favorite color and there wasn't a pink crayon in that box. Right. And so how much of the time too do we sit there and we're like that little girl and it's like, damn it, it's not what I want. So I'm just going to sit here and do nothing. Right. Instead of actually taking the action and going, well, you know what? The pink crayon isn't there, but red's close enough. So let's just pick it up and let's do it and let's move on. Because if we're not making progress going forward, then we're just sitting there, or a lot of times actually going backwards. It's like we're on an escalator, that's going down and we're trying to go up. You just stand there, you're going to end up on the bottom again. So I think that's, those two things popped into my head. So I thought I'd share them as well, because I think they kind of go along with this. If your goals aren't working out exactly the way you want them to, then you have to know when to persevere and when to maybe change direction and realize that maybe the universe has some other goal for you, or some other purpose for you, or some other way for you to meet that why. It's like you were talking about the gentleman at the beginning who wanted to win the lottery.
Right.
He didn't have to win the lottery to accomplish his underlying goal or purpose.
Yeah. Sometimes, and I've seen this with my clients, I think there's a lot of secondary gain in not reaching your goal. I think because then you get to say, I want this thing, and you get to talk about wanting this thing, and you get to, I don't want to talk about wanting that thing. I don't want to talk about, oh, I'm struggling so much because I can't write my book. That's not the attention that I want. I don't think that's the attention you want. I don't think that's attention our listeners want. We all want to achieve those things. But I think there's such a huge identity wrapped up in that struggle. I'm so stressed out. I'm so busy. That's become a badge of honor. And I think busy doesn't equal success.
Oh,
Busy doesn't mean that you're accomplishing things. Busy means you're running yourself ragged. I understand that busy factor of a little, just skosh. I'm maybe slightly type A. I don't know if any of you noticed, but it's true. It's like we get wrapped up in that doing of things and spinning our wheels, and it's like, okay, but you're not actually getting anywhere. So I think we have to watch out how we're identifying ourselves and what little badge we're wearing. Hi, I'm a writer. Or is it, hi, I'm a crazy busy person who thinks they want to write a book someday. So I think sometimes we have to throw out all this crap, and it goes back to setting your goals, but it also see what you're identifying with and see if you're getting secondary gain, meaning you're getting attention from the negative stuff for not reaching your goals. Are you just more excited to tell people you're doing it? Do you actually want it? I think that's actually an important question too.
well, I think that is an important question. And that goes back to, some of the things that I think is so important too about being unique, being yourself, and not necessarily doing things just because that's what everybody tells you, right? I mean, like this whole busy thing, right? I mean, people have gotten this, like you said, it's a badge of honor. Well, how you doing? Oh, well, I'm so busy, right? Well, if I'm busy, then I must be important. And it's like BS, right? If you're busy, well, it's a good thing. But if you're frenzied, right, and kind of crazy busy, that's not good, because from a psyche perspective, that really kind of messes with you as well. And call me lazy, but I'd rather work smarter than harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there was a philosopher who I was reading a lot of his work, and one of the things he was talking about was decentrating. And every time I mention that word to people, they go, that's not a word. Like, yeah, but it is to this guy. So we're concentrating. We can only do that for so long. We can only push that for so long before our brain goes, time out, I'm done. And he talks specifically about decentrating, about letting that pendulum swing and giving yourself a rest for a second. And it's not procrastination, and it's not lazy, and it's not, oh, you're distracted by the cat video on Facebook. It's, you seriously have to give yourself a break. And I really find time, especially if I'm trying to write my book, which takes so much concentration, I allow myself to decentrate. And I typically do that with watching a couple trapeze videos. Now that I have a guinea pig, I'll watch cute guinea pig videos, something to give me that time out. I put myself in time out until I'm behaving, and then I can go back to work. But I think it's important to stop and take that pause every once in a while. That's why I do my daily pause every day for people, because I want them to realize they can take that breath, stop. You don't have to be productive 24/7. It's impossible. And social media and cell phones allows us to, but is it really getting the work done if you're so crazy you don't even know what you're doing? Is it efficient at that point?
Well, it's not. And there's actually been, because I've read a lot of research too about productivity in the workplace and other things like that, and even productivity in your own life. And there's quite a few scientific studies that show working more, decreases your productivity significantly. And there's kind of a tipping point, especially like in the workplace. If people are working more than 50 hours a week, their productivity goes down significantly, so much so that every additional hour that they try to put in, they're actually wasting more time. So it becomes like a negative investment at that point. And like you said, having those daily pauses, or bringing more mindful practices into your life actually makes you much more productive when you're doing it. So again, maybe how does that tie to goal setting and everything as well, right? Is it, as you're trying to achieve that goal, don't try so hard and push yourself so hard that you end up kind of burning yourself out, but realize and take those little steps and pause when you need to, and then go again, right? Because the problem is, if we push ourselves too hard, then we end up having some serious problems, right? So here's another athletic kind of one, right? I like to do hiking too. And so my stepson and I we were on a hike up in the Sequoia area of here in California. And we were going up a pretty steep incline. And again, middle-aged man that's trying to get into shape. And I can push myself because, again, in my mind, I can see myself and push myself. But there came a few points on this when we were going up probably about 2,000 feet in about half a mile, which is pretty steep. I just had to stop. I could go hard for a minute or two, but then I needed to stop. And how did I know that? Because I could feel my pulse, right? I knew where my pulse was at, and that my heart was, I was getting a good workout, but it was time to stop. Because if I tried to just push myself further without taking that little bit of a pause, it wouldn't be good for me physically, and sometimes not good for us emotionally as well. That we need that pause in there as well. As long as we're making those slow and steady steps, we're going to get to our goal eventually. You don't have to get there tomorrow, right? And like you said, if I went out and tried to run a marathon tomorrow, I could probably do it. It's going to take me a long time and I might collapse. So it's probably not the smartest idea. But if I take those small and simple steps, then I can end up getting to where I want to go.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. That's a fabulous thought. I think we should end on that thought of you crossing that finish line.
Crossing the finish line. Ooh, yeah.
Playing the Chariots of Fire music and
dun, da, 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 da. See, now I'm visualizing it and I'm running through. There we go.
Good.
But yeah, I think that's probably, like you said, probably a good place for us to stop today. I mean, so if we kind of recap a little bit, because again, if we're talking about goal setting, right? I mean, our whole goal with this podcast too is to help people really, give you the keys to unlock your potential, because the human body has, and humans in general, we have so much potential that's actually locked up. That the more we do some of these things, and so the first one we talked about today was goal setting, right? So make sure keep me honest on this, but as we're going through some of the things that we talked today about with goal setting, try to make sure and sit down and think about what it is and why you really want to accomplish something. Be clear on the why, because there's going to be a lot of different ways for you to get there. But if you're clear on that, if you create some sort of a to-do or action item list that breaks up those different things that you need to do, visualization and having the positive thoughts, seeing yourself doing this, but then actually going out and doing some of these things, even again, celebrate those small wins along the way, because the more of those you can collect, the more successful you'll be in the future. because your body and your mind already knows you can do it, right? Be as specific as possible and make sure that it's something that's achievable. And so again, we can go back to the old SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. But so probably, should we give the listeners a goal for this week for them to try to do?
Yeah. So why don't we make the goal this week to write down your goal for this week?
There
Seems
you go.
Good.
That seems good, doesn't it?
Yeah, your goal for this week should be to write your goal for this week, but also break it down. I want to write a book. Okay, well, give yourself a date. Okay, by January 1st, I will at least have the first chapter, or I will find a title, or I will research to see if anybody else wrote the same book, because sometimes that stops you. You have this great idea, and then you get on Amazon, you're like, oh, there's 12 of those. And maybe you have a different voice. Maybe it shifts a little bit of your thinking. But yeah, let's make this week about writing down your goal and then breaking it down into those doable steps, and then also seeing if there's anyone that can help you with that. I think that's an important thing too, is calling on friends and saying, hey, I want to run this marathon. Do you want to meet with me every week and run? Or do you want to keep me accountable? Or do you want to stand at the finish line with a cheerleader costume on and pom-poms and make me run? And whatever. But asking for help is a good thing too. This is why we're doing this podcast, because we're here to help you. So any final thoughts, Jason?
Well, no, I think that's, and again, just so people don't feel overwhelmed, just pick one thing, right? Because if you pick one thing, if you do one thing different this week, then next week is going to be better than this week. And, slow and steady wins the race. One bite at a time eats the elephant. So, just go out and do it. And because you can do it.
Yay, go for it, as my license plate says.
Go for it. I do like that.
It was my motto since high school. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for tuning into the Fire and Earth podcast. I am Kathy Groover, and I can be reached at kathygroover.com.
And I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. So thanks for joining us today. Have a great week, and we look forward to being with you again on a future podcast.
See you next time.
Yeah.